Welcome to Murder Road Trip. I'm your host, Haley. Joining me on today's road trip are the two hosts of the Fall Line podcast, Laura and Brooke. Can you tell us about the Fall Line?
So, The Fall Line is a serial audio documentary that focuses on cases in the state of Georgia that, for whatever reason, have fallen through the cracks. The first season that we did, we examined the disappearance of 15-year-old twins, Jeanette and Danette Millbrook. They disappeared from Augusta, Georgia in 1990, and their family is still looking for them. We are hard at work on season 1.5, and we will be looking into the 1989 disappearance of Michael and Monica Bennett. They were 13 and 15-year-old siblings who disappeared from Brunswick, Georgia.
Awesome. I was an avid follower of season 1, and I cannot wait for season 1.5. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
Yes, we can be found on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts.
Thank you for being my road trip buddies.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us.
We will be snacking on Coca-Cola and Lay's potato chips as we make our way to Atlanta, Georgia to discuss spree killer Mark Barton. When I have a co-host, or two in this case, I usually ask them what topic they would like to discuss. What made you pick Mark Barton for today's trip?
For my part, I found Mark Barton really interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is I'm always fascinated by family annihilators. The men who, for some reason, feel driven to murder their whole families, and they usually go off and start a new life, so Barton was a little different there. And also, Mark Barton was working in Buckhead, which is a neighborhood of Atlanta that is, what, Brooke? It kind of signifies luxury.
Yuppie.
Yeah, yuppie, luxury, and especially in 1999 in Atlanta, the class divide was a little less striated into different groups. So it was pretty much rich and poor. And in 1999 in Buckhead, that was where all the rich people were. So the idea that someone would come in and murder people in this very high-end, very seemingly safe area was interesting to us.
Wow. I really like that insight. I had no idea that Buckhead was such a wealthy area.
Oh, it still is today. The housing there is incredibly expensive, and that's, if you have a salon where you want to charge $300, or if you're a Porsche mechanic like someone I know, that's where your shop is.
Yeah, and it's not just the wealth, it's also the trendiness, especially at that time. It was the place to be for all the young professionals.
Especially on the weekends, people would go down to Buckhead and just drive through it over and over to the point where they had to put up signs that said no cruising. And now, of course, at night, it's become kind of a ghost town because now it's not cool. Now there's a lot of rich people who are, eating at vegan restaurants, and making craft beer and knitting and such. But at the time, it was still yuppie year. So Mark Barton was fascinating to us because of that.
I was glad you ended up picking this case because I found his case to be really interesting. All right, are you ready to go?
We are.
Let's go.
We lost the station again.
Keep trying.
I'm safe.
Hold on. Let me try this one.
Stop. That's it.
Turn it up.
Mark Orrin Barton was born on April 2nd, 1955, to Truman and Gladys Barton. Truman Barton was in the United States Air Force and was stationed in Germany when Mark was born. Eventually, the Barton family was restationed in Sumter, South Carolina. It is reported that Truman was a harsh parent. The crueler the punishment, the better. Gladys was opposite. She was a kind mother. I just have to have a side note here. Sumter, South Carolina was a trigger point for me because it reminded me of Donald Gaskins. That's where he murdered a lot of people, so...
He did, didn't he? I always forget that he was in South Carolina. But yeah, there's Sumter, and there's actually a lot of stuff in South Carolina. Who was Susan Smith, who drowned her kids? If you remember, that was in South Carolina. The Taco Bell Strangler was South Carolina and North Carolina. I'm sure there's more, but I can't remember them.
You guys are crazy over there in the South.
It's hot.
Oh, that's true. That makes people mad.
It's hot and it's a wet heat.
Pass. In school, Mark was an introvert. He was made fun of for being so big. He was 6'4" and 205 pounds by high school. Although he did not play sports, Mark was exceptionally good at chemistry. By 16, Mark already had a career as a petty thief. He also began making his own psychedelic drugs. He had heard about extracting powder from morning glory seeds and mixing the powder with a chemical solution. The result was something similar to LSD. After overdosing on this concoction, Mark went to the emergency room. According to his psychologist at the time, Mark's behavior was never the same. He began seeing demons at school and lost the ability to read. After relearning how to read, he took up the Bible, and Mark was bullied even more.
Was his family already religious? Do you guys know?
I don't think so, because they made a big deal about the fact that he took up the Bible.
Taking up the Bible is such a weird thing. Taking up the Bible.
It's a strange turn of phrase.
It is. I'm just wondering, like, how often kids... I know kids in the 70s were experimenting with drugs, but how often were they experimenting with making their own drugs? That's so interesting to me. So, in 1973, Mark graduated from Sumter High School, and then he attended Clemson University for a semester, but dropped out after having another psychotic episode. For the remainder of the school year, Mark received antipsychotic drug therapy. After finishing the therapy, Mark enrolled at the University of South Carolina. While in college, Mark learned how to manufacture methamphetamine. He was soon using and selling it. He was arrested at 20 years old when he tried to burglarize a store, and he received probation. That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
He was the original Walter White.
I mean, apparently people were making meth that long ago. It seems like a newer drug to me, but I guess. In 1979, Mark earned a bachelor's degree of science and chemistry from the University of South Carolina. While attending the university, he met Deborah Spivey. The two were married in Atlanta, Georgia, and Mark got a job in Texarkana, Texas as a chemist at TLC Manufacturing. Within 5 years, he was a manager and he made a nice yearly salary. And in 1988, the couple had their first child, a son named Matthew.
Can I point out at this juncture that this is the last we hear of psychotic episodes, and that is very rare. What would be rare would be for him to have recurrent psychotic episodes that required treatment with antipsychotic medications, and then it just disappears. That is not usually the case. So it makes me think it must be tied to his use of these recreational drugs he was using, which can certainly set off psychotic episodes.
Do you think that he wasn't having them anymore, or he wasn't like reporting them or seeking help for them anymore?
Yeah, we don't know. It's possible that the reason he was treated at a young age was because he was supervised by his parents. And as he was an adult, he maybe didn't seek treatment himself.
Especially if you look at like the stuff that Haley's about to talk about, it begins to seem like maybe he should have sought that help.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Although everything appeared normal on the surface, Mark was still struggling with behavioral issues. He thought everyone was out to get him. He started recording conversations he had with coworkers, and he threw things in the office. He also became abusive toward Deborah. She had to tell Mark whenever she wanted to leave the house, what she was doing, when she would be back, and more. Eventually, TLC Manufacturing noticed Mark's erratic behavior. They terminated him on September 13th, 1990. He left the building very unhappy. On September 20th, Mark broke into TLC Manufacturing and stole confidential data off 2 computers. When he was finished, Mark wiped the hard drives clean. Next, Mark found the hard copies of the data, and he stole those as well. And the way he broke in is absolutely fascinating. He broke in through a dock door, then he moved the refrigerator and broke in through this area behind the refrigerator. It sounded like a movie.
Crawl through a wall?
Yeah.
What you're mentioning could be another psychotic episode. He just maybe wasn't treated for it. But his behavior before they fired him sounds like he was going off the rails.
You think? Yeah. With the recording of the conversations. Like, how would you like it
Paranoia.
to find out that, like, your boring coworker who irritates you has been recording every mundane exchange that you've had for months? And throwing things in the office, like, what are we talking about? Like a stapler, a chair, something that's just pathetic, like a piece of paper.
They didn't say, but I just imagine him just like getting really mad and throwing his keyboard.
Like a big clunky like what year was it? It wasn't even the 1990 keyboard.
His desktop.
Something that's attached to his iMac, yeah.
The company figured the thief had to be Mark Barton. Police were called and the detectives went to visit Mark at home. He implicated himself on accident and was arrested and then charged with felony burglary. He was only in jail for a few hours before TLC Manufacturing dropped the charges against Mark and he was sent home. Mark and TLC Manufacturing had made a deal. He would return the files and move from the state of Texas.
That is so weird.
Okay, so is the consensus here that he had broken in, stolen files that implicate them in doing something illegal?
I should have elaborated on that. He broke in and stole secret formulas, and to replace the formulas was going to cost them a lot of money, and so it was just cheaper for them to drop the charges and get the files back from him rather than him never give them the files back.
I'm just still stuck on, like, move out of the state of Texas. It seems like this guy, like so many of the people that we cover in true crime, gets chance after chance after chance, which is what leads to him ultimately really causing some damage in the world. Probation for robbery, dropping, stealing company information, that's certainly a felony. Breaking in, getting off of it once again, and then going on to do other stuff.
The real shame is that this didn't make it onto his record, and so his future employers had no idea that he was causing a hostile work environment.
Absolutely.
I guess people weren't checking his references. Like, you figured they'd call, or did they? And they called TLC and they were like, he was great. We'd like him to move from Texas now.
Right.
I don't know what the laws were at that time, but currently there are laws in place in different states where you can only confirm whether or not an employee worked for you for an amount of time, but you can't say anything bad about them, even if they threw staplers or desktop computers or whatever.
Because we're all mad litigious, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah. Huh. Okay, well, the family moved to Macon, Georgia, and Mark started a new job. Their second child, Michelle, was born in 1991. Mark found a job as a salesman for a chemical company in Douglasville, Georgia. And Macon and Douglasville, by the way, are not close, so that seems like a hike. And the family then bought a home there. After starting his new job, Mark started an affair with a married receptionist named Leanne. So, as one would assume, Mark bought a new wardrobe and he began tanning. Deborah became suspicious of Mark and began accusing him of having an affair, and he told her she was just paranoid. Meanwhile, he looked into buying a life insurance policy for Deborah and secured a policy for $600,000. Now, I have a random question you guys may not be able to answer. But you know how we're always hearing about in true crime people taking out big ol' insurance policies on their spouse? Is the spouse signing off on these?
I don't know. However, in this case, I believe from what I read, there is a deposition. The insurance company deposed him for, I think, 6 hours or something. And during that time, he claimed that she was actually the one who wanted the insurance policy. He claimed that she started feeling lots of self-importance. He actually said she thought she was just as important as me, and her sense of self was just very inflated. So that's why she wanted that insurance policy.
I mean, it's just kind of wild to me because I have a fair amount of insurance on me. Don't kill me. But in order to get it, an angry Russian lady came to my house and gave me a battery of tests.
Wow.
And to get insurance on my husband, I'd have to do the same. So it's kind of, maybe in the 90s, it was wilder. I don't know, free for all.
That is interesting. And I want to mention that he originally tried to secure $1 million policy. And after reviewing how much the premiums were, he realized he couldn't afford it. So then he went down to a $600,000 policy.
Yeah, poor Mark. In June of 1993, Mark and Leanne visited some of Leanne's friends in North Carolina. While there, Mark told them that he had never loved anyone more than Leanne and that he would be able to marry her by October. Nobody realized this was an issue. Leanne left her husband and moved into her own apartment.
On Labor Day weekend, Deborah and her mother, Eloise, went on vacation in Alabama. By the end of the long weekend, both were bludgeoned to death with a hammer. Eloise had been hit 8 to 10 times. Deborah had been hit more than that, and all of her wounds were to the head and face. When police arrived at the scene, they found that the murderer had vomited in and around the toilet. And so police said that when they found Deborah, because of the amount of wounds she had, they believed that he had to be mad at this person. The murderer had to be mad. And that he had fantasized about the murder, but when it came down to it, it made him physically sick, and that's why he vomited.
This is 1990 something, so like, did they take DNA samples or?
Apparently, he wouldn't give them his DNA sample, but I am shocked that they wouldn't have been able to get some kind of a warrant that would put him in jail until he gave a DNA sample, considering all of the evidence they had against him.
And all the vomit. That's a lot. I feel like how many people live that much of, you know what I mean? I'm not a DNA vomit expert, but I'm assuming that it's there, like it would be easy enough to test. Okay, so the crime scene appeared to be a stage burglary. The murderer wanted police to think that a burglary had occurred, but they found $600 in cash, among other things, in Eloise's purse. When police called Eloise's husband and Mark to come to Alabama, Mark did not seem upset at all. He became extremely uncooperative, and police wanted to test him and his vehicle floor mats for blood, but he refused to let them test the rest of the vehicle. Police told him not to clean his car, but then they were finally able to test it, and guess what? He cleaned his car. Technicians were able to find blood spatters on the steering wheel and the gear shift, and they also found blood in Mark's garage. Mark said the blood was from Deborah cutting her hand, some earlier point. Next, police found out that Mark had called the company that creates luminol, which is the solution technicians use to spot blood. Haley, I have a question there. Why did he call them?
Oh, I don't know, because he wanted to clean the car and see, what solutions he could use to make the blood go away where luminol couldn't detect it.
So apparently, when the police told him they were using luminol in his car, he claimed to have no idea what that chemical was, even though he's a chemist. So obviously he's lying there.
Right. They were like, what do you mean you don't know this? Even the lay person knows what luminol is.
Don't you watch Forensic Files? So then they found the blood on his ignition switch and several other places. By the time he submitted his car to them for testing, he had mysteriously spilt soda on each spot in the car that had blood on it. The seatbelt part, the ignition switch. It was a very sad accident with soda in these small places.
Weird.
And because of stuff like that, wily Mark, right? The police decided the only way to get a murder conviction was to have him confess, but he wouldn't budge. And I understand, I'm sure they did their due diligence there, but I'm just imagining them going, say you did it. He's like, nope, back and forth. And they didn't have enough evidence to charge him, which is wild to me. But I guess they have to follow evidentiary procedure because you don't want to charge him, have him get off, and then,
Exactly. So that was their thinking on that, was the blood spotters didn't have enough to get any type of DNA testing off of them. So there really wasn't any physical evidence. It was all circumstantial. They figured, let's not arrest him and charge him now, because the chances of him getting acquitted of the charges are pretty high. Let's focus on some other cases, and if any other evidence pops up, we can charge him. It's better, like you said, to not charge somebody than to charge them and have them be acquitted, and then you can never charge them again with that crime. In October, the family held a funeral for Deborah and Eloise. When the funeral was over, Mark made his way to the parking lot and jumped in Leanne's convertible, and the two sped off. Leanne quickly moved into the Barton home following Deborah's death. The insurance company did not want to pay Mark the money because they believed he was the murderer. The company offered to pay the full $600,000 if the money went into a trust for the children. When Mark refused, the company was forced to settle. Mark received $250,000, and the remaining $350,000 was put into a trust for the children. Leanne and Mark soon married, and the family moved to Morrow, Georgia. Mark continued to question detectives as to why he was a suspect in the murders of Deborah and her mother. At one point, he drove to Alabama and told detectives that he remembered why there had been blood in the car. He had cut his finger. But when police asked for a DNA sample, he said no.
Like, he's calling them, like, from Morrow, like, hey, police, why are you following me around? And then he drove to Alabama. That's like a 3-hour drive at least.
To tell them he remembered that he cut his finger.
I mean, I just feel like he's guilty, and it's making him even more paranoid. It's like people who are guilty just try so hard to seem innocent, and this is what it reminds me of. Just really trying to overcompensate. Like, there's no need to drive to Alabama. That's a phone conversation.
I mean, we had email by then. I know, Haley, you weren't born yet, but we had email by then. I mean, send it on AOL, Mark, you know?
I was born at this point.
In February of 1994?
Yeah.
Okay. In February of 1994, 2.5-year-old Michelle told a daycare worker that her father molested her. When there wasn't enough evidence to charge Mark, the case was dropped, and he maintained custody of both children. Did you have any more information? I know you read a book about it, Haley. Like, how much did they cover that? Because I wasn't able to find out a whole lot about it.
They didn't really cover it at all. I guess there wasn't enough evidence. Like, they questioned him, and he just said it wasn't true, and then the daughter didn't really elaborate, so he just...
That's devastating.
Yeah.
They did make a big deal about the fact that he was able to maintain custody of both children even after the allegations.
I mean, that does, like, once again, I don't know a lot about the family court system, but that doesn't seem particularly normal.
From my understanding, it takes a lot to prove allegations of child molestation, especially if it's a family member. They have experts that interview children. You know, they get them seen by doctors. Unfortunately, a 2.5-year-old is what we would call not an accurate historian. They may one minute say, I was molested, and the next minute you ask them by who, and they might say a dinosaur because their imagination is interfering with their ability to talk about reality.
That makes sense. I mean, having a kid near that age, he'll say there's some trash on the ground, and I'll be like, oh yeah, where do you think it came from? And he'll say it fell off of a tiger's back. And that's something he said to me, and that, you know, it must be difficult, but at the same time, you feel like they would be watching that.
I have a 2.5-year-old, and he frequently reports ridiculous things that did not happen. But sometimes he reports things that did happen. It's really very sad. A child that age, unless they can come up with some kind of physical evidence or catch the person in the act, the child is really, unfortunately, not able to be protected.
That is interesting to me because the next big part of this is that over the next 4 years, really, but from that point on, Leanne and Mark's relationship fell apart. And that makes me wonder how much she suspected about what may have been going on. He was abusive and controlling toward her, and in 1998, his behavior got even worse. He had run through all the insurance money, and then, guys, he killed their family cat and then took his kids out to look for the cat.
Do we have more information about that?
No.
It seems to me that that's narcissism, right? Isn't it?
Well, I mean, clearly, a person who can kill an animal lacks empathy. When you have empathy, you look at something that's suffering and you feel very sad, and you don't want that creature to suffer at your hands. So
I mean more of the, not the killing of the animal, but the setting up the drama of, here kids, let's go look for the cat. Let's all go out in the neighborhood and put up posters when you killed the cat.
Well, we wouldn't have enough information about that. What was his motivation to take them to look for the cat? Did he decide he hated the cat, wanted to get rid of it, but also didn't want to have to tell the children that he had killed it? So therefore he set up this ruse of, Kitty ran away, and they said, oh no, what do we do? Oh, well, why don't we go look for the cat? It may have been trying to keep his kids from knowing what he did.
Huh. See, I immediately read it as like creating an attention-seeking thing. Like, I go straight to like, oh no, here I've created a family trauma or drama that must be dealt with. But, I also spent a lot of time reading about Munchausen by proxy, so.
That was the vibe I got too, was almost that he was bored. And he was like, oh, I need more drama in my life. Make the attention on me. Let's kill the cat. Then go search for it. But there wasn't a lot of information about it. I just kind of got that vibe from when his behavior was erratic. And I think he was just doing anything to make Leanne stay.
Oh, that did not occur to me.
There wasn't a lot of information, so I just kind of summed it up. But basically, it's just the vibe I got that he knew that she wanted to leave, and he was just doing crazy things to make her stay.
That's so crazy, though, to be like, look, I killed the kid's cat. Now we're looking for it. You have to stay. Oh, that makes sense. So in between Pet Murder in 98, Mark began working at Alltech Investment Group, and he started with a self-funded $50,000 trading account. By March, Mark had drained the account and owed Alltech over $11,000. And because the account was negative, he was forced to stop trading at that time. And I don't know a lot about trading, but to me, it seems like he wasn't very good at it.
No, I don't know anything either, but I guess he was very compulsive. He just was making really big trades that didn't make any sense. He was a gambler, basically, was what it was. He was treating the money like he was at a casino.
Not a smart gambler.
And that was February, and then in April, he came back to the company and told them he had invented a new kind of soap and made a lot of money, right? So he paid his debts, he resupplied the $50,000 to the trading account, and by May, he was back to where he was before, but he owed them $30,000. Then Mark told his boss, Brent, that he would go back to making soap, and he would be back soon with the $30,000 he owed them. Brent and Mark remained in contact. I actually talked to someone who is in the science fields about this, and they said that the same chemicals used to make soap are used to manufacture methamphetamine. And he wondered if that was some sort of weird Mark phrase for cooking drugs. Did you know anything about that, Haley?
You know what? They did not even hint at that, but as you were reading it, I thought to myself, where was he getting this money? Because he had already drained the insurance money. So it made me think, as you were reading it, that maybe he was manufacturing drugs again. He just went back to his roots. And
$50,000 is a lot to come up with, even if you do invent soap. So in April of 1999, Leanne finally left Mark, and he quickly talked her into coming back. The family then moved to an apartment in Stockbridge, Georgia. That's south of Atlanta. And Mark got a job trading stocks at Momentum Securities. He soon owed Momentum Securities money as well, except this time it was way more than Alltech, because by June 10th, he owed them $187,500. Y'all, he started in February.
On one hand, I keep wondering, how does he keep getting jobs? On the other hand, it seems like as soon as they give him a job, he starts with his own money at $50,000. So that's like buying a job.
They were very impressed by him. They were very impressed by the fact that he would just walk in and they would say, we need you, especially somebody who was not familiar with the field. He would just walk in and say, I would like to be a stock trader. And they would say, well, you have to start with 50,000. He's like, will you take a check today? Just very full of himself and very arrogant. And I think they were very impressed by the fact that this guy was so willing to come up with this money. And sometimes he was good at his job. And so I felt like they had confidence in him, but then he would take it too far. And then he would be in the hole.
He certainly appears to have a history of being able to be very charming when he wanted to, which is actually, it can be a frequent trait in killers.
What's interesting to me is that at this time, he also went to a Jehovah's Witness minister, and I assume he's a witness because he calls God Jehovah at various points. And he explained the situation, what was going on, that his wife wanted to leave him, that he was gambling on stocks, which struck me as interesting because normally people who are on that antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic kind of vein, don't spend a lot of time reflecting on their actions.
So I kind of look at it more as this was just another way to get attention. But this was also interesting to me because there was never a mention of Jehovah's Witness before this. And then there was not mention of Jehovah's Witness until later on with the notes that he leaves. And so I wonder, at what point did he become a Jehovah's Witness? On July 27th, 1999, Mark woke up and bludgeoned his wife, 27-year-old Leanne, to death as she was sleeping. On July 28th, he bludgeoned his children, 11-year-old Matthew and 8-year-old Michelle, to death. He then drowned them in a bathtub, dried them off, redressed them, tucked them into bed, covered their bodies with blankets, and surrounded them with their favorite toys. On July 29th, Mark headed to Momentum Securities at around 2:20 p.m. After talking to his coworkers for a few minutes, Mark learned that the day had been bad for stock trading. Mark then said, "It's a bad trading day, and it's about to get worse." Then he pulled out a .45 caliber Colt and a 9mm Glock and opened fire. First, he killed 38-year-old Kevin Dial with 2 shots, one in the back, the other in the heart. After killing Kevin, Mark traveled down the rows of workstations. 30-year-old Scott Webb was the second to be shot. The bullet entered his lung. Andrew Zaparzala and James Jordan were shot at next. Andrew was not hit, but James suffered 2 non-fatal wounds, one in the side and the other in the arm. Next, Brad Schomo was shot twice, once in the back and once in the shoulder. 58-year-old Eber Quinn was fatally shot in the neck. Mark headed toward the receptionist, Marcy Brooking, and shot her. Next, Mark fatally shot 42-year-old Russell Brown 3 times. Employees were hiding as Mark Barton continued to travel around the building, shooting both guns. Mark went up to Scott Webb and shot him again. He also shot Brad Schomo a 3rd time. By the time Mark left the Momentum Securities building, he had killed 4 people: Edward Quinn, Kevin Dial, Russell Brown, and Scott Webb.
And did he know everybody, or was it more like a just like I've seen you around kind of thing?
Several of the people that he shot had personally loaned him money. You know, when he would get below the 50,000, they would tell him, you have to come up with 50,000 in order to be able to trade again. And so some of his colleagues loaned him money and enabled him to get back into the game and trade again. And those were people that he actually killed. Also, if we could just pause and point out, the police officer who described the witness statements said that when he did his little catchphrase, "It's about to get a whole lot worse," he pulled out both guns at once and fired them at the same time, which is very like a movie scene.
It was making me think about, like, once again, like, do you remember The Crow? And all of those like mid to late 90s movies where everyone had 2 guns, and you guys are, we're used to it now with people slowly spinning through the air as they shoot sideways, but it is not a good way to shoot.
No.
And so it just seems like, once again, you're right, he's so heavily influenced by movies and by sort of a character creation.
Yeah, what I found remarkable is that this was his chance to express himself to these people who obviously he was angry enough at to kill. He could have made any kind of authentic statement about his emotional experience, about something he wanted to communicate to them before they died. Instead, he chose to act like Arnold Schwarzenegger with the catchphrase and do a,
It's very
I found it interesting.
So if the Momentum Security stuff wasn't bad enough, he then walked across the street to Alltech. Upon entering the building at 3, his previous manager, Brent Doonan, thought Mark was coming in to repay the $30,000 he had lost the company. Mark asked Brent if the 2 of them could talk, and Brent said yes, but he needed a minute. While waiting for Brent, Mark ran into the other office manager, Scott Manspeaker, and his assistant, Kathy Van Camp. The 3 were chatting when Scott noticed that Mark had red splatters on his arms, hand, and shirt. And I guess Scott didn't say anything about it, because then the 3 entered the main office and Mark closed the blinds. He then left the office and headed back to the conference room where Brent was. He opened the door and said, "Brent, come here quick. Really? You're going to love this." Then Brent and Mark headed into the main office. Once in the office, Mark closed the door and told Brent, Scott, and Kathy that today is going to be visual. What does that mean?
I have no idea.
Zero clue. I'm like, is this is it the kind of thing you would say in a presentation or? But
it's also slightly possible. They referred to his teenage years of having visual hallucinations of demons in high school when he was having a psychotic episode. We don't know about his mental health at that moment, but it's possible he could have been referring to something, responding to internal stimuli. I don't know.
Because right after that, he lifted up his shirt, he took out the 2 guns he had in his waistband, shot Brent twice, fired shots at Scott and Kathy, then left the main office, headed out onto the trading floor, and began shooting people.
Jamshid Havash, 45 years old, was shot in the back by Mark's 9mm. Yusuf Lieberson was shot in the head, and Fred Herder was shot in the back. Dean Delawala, 52 years old, tried to make it to an exit, but Mark shot him in the back before he could make it. He was shot again as he fell to the floor. Joseph Desert, 60, was shot twice by the .45 caliber, once in the shoulder and once in the chest. Alan Tenenbaum was shot in the upper back, torso, and right shoulder. Dean Delawala was shot in the head, neck, shoulder, back, and buttocks. As they were seeking shelter, Charles Williams, Harry Higginbotham, Sang Yoon, and Meredith Winnett were all shot. Charles suffered a chest wound, Harry a head wound, Sang a head wound, and Meredith a back wound.
So meanwhile, Brent Doonan was attempting to make it to an exit from the conference room. He was badly wounded, but he was able to tackle Mark as he aimed to shoot another employee. After the tackle, Mark quickly steadied himself, Brent took off running, and Mark shot 2 rounds. The first bullet hit Brent's left arm, and the second hit Brent's left shoulder blade. Brent was able to make it to an exit and headed down a hallway. He located the elevator, pressed the down button, and as he waited for the elevator to arrive, he saw Mark Barton appear at the other end of the hallway, which is like a horror movie. Brent was able to close the elevator doors just as Mark pointed the gun and fired off a round.
As police responded to the 911 calls from the Momentum Securities building, an employee inside the Alltech building called 911 and said they needed help. The operator misunderstood the caller and believed the address she had just received was the same one as the Momentum Securities building. She told the caller police were already there.
Because police did not respond to the Alltech office, Mark Barton was able to leave the building, get into his minivan, and leave undetected.
After Mark left, Brent stumbled into another office in the same building. The employees of that department called 911. At the same time, a motorcycle officer heard gunshots coming from the Alltech office building. He went inside and found the crime scene. He called for backup, but the operator said he was at the wrong building. It took 30 more minutes before a commanding officer figured out there were crime scenes at 2 different areas. One person thought to go through the employee records and found Mark Barton's file, and the file was given to police.
I will say that Buckhead is so densely populated by businesses, sort of stacked on top of each other. I can see why it would have been difficult to pin down. Because, there'll be 50 or 60 businesses crowded into a block.
And they were on the same street, right? Just across.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can see how the wires would get crossed there pretty easily. 5 people were killed in the Alltech office that afternoon. Alan Tenenbaum, Dean Delawala, Joseph Desert, Hashmid Havash, and Vadavati Mudlahara.
Police searched nearby buildings. They set up roadblocks and searched all cars. They had 3 helicopters searching for Mark Barton in his white minivan. But police had misinformation. Mark's minivan was green. And authorities had no idea where Mark Barton was headed.
Why did he have a minivan? This is not the kind of guy who says, well, got kids, better get a minivan.
Right, I bet he had a sports car, but he used the minivan to murder. Because it probably fit in better when he was leaving. But I do imagine that this guy had a freaking sports car in the garage.
It just seems like he would totally go rolling into the sports car again. It doesn't seem to fit his persona he's developing.
Well, his wife definitely had the convertible wherein he performed a stunt. at the funeral.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And he actually, and speaking of cars, right, he was thinking ahead, like Haley pointed out about cars, because 4 hours later, he approached a young woman in a mall parking lot in northwest Atlanta as she was getting into her vehicle. And he told her, "Don't scream or I'll shoot you." The woman ran off before Mark reached her, which was smart. She ran to a nearby phone and she called security. Another woman recognized Mark from the news and called 911 as he got into his green minivan. So, like, what's confusing to me here is it sounds like he was trying to get her car. Mm-hmm. And then ran back to his minivan instead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he figured police had figured out what kind of car he was driving, and so he wanted another one in order to blend in. After he left the mall parking lot, police caught sight of Mark driving. They began following him and saw Mark enter a gas station parking lot. As he circled the station, police cruisers blocked both entrances to the station. When Mark pulled around, he saw the police. Police surrounded the vehicle and told him to throw his gun out of the window, exit the van, and lie face down on the ground. Mark did not comply. Instead, he pointed the .45 to his left temple and the 9mm to his right. Only one gun fired.
So, Brooke, let me ask you a question. Mm-hmm. Are you surprised by his choice to do that rather than surrender, or does it sort of fit in with his persona?
No, I'm not surprised at all.
The drama of the two guns at once thing seems real fitting to me. Mm-hmm. But I know with some of these guys, they end up turning themselves in rather than choosing to kill themselves when they're faced by police.
One of the things that I noticed about him throughout his life, he appeared to be very angry with anyone who saw him in a state of vulnerability. Huh. He did not feel comfortable, it seems, showing any signs of weakness or vulnerability. Going to prison is the ultimate vulnerability. You can't use the bathroom by yourself. You have very little self-respect when you're in prison. People treat you like you're a child. So, no, it doesn't at all surprise me that he would try and go out like a badass with the two guns and the...
Well, when police searched his car, right, they found 4 handguns, ammunition, and a large amount of cash, which I found interesting. Mm-hmm. The on-scene sergeant called for an ambulance and then headed to Barton's apartment. When police arrived at the apartment, they found a note that read,
"To whom it may concern, Leanne is in the master bedroom closet underneath the blanket. I killed her on Tuesday night. I killed the children on Wednesday night. There may be similarities between these deaths and the death of my first wife, Deborah Spivey. However, I deny killing her and her mother. There's no reason for me to lie now. It just seemed like a quiet way to kill and relatively painless way to die. There was little pain. All of them were dead in less than 5 minutes. I hit them with a hammer in their sleep and then put them face down in the bathtub to make sure they didn't wake up in pain, to make sure they were dead. I am so sorry. I wish I didn't. Words cannot tell the agony. Why did I? I have been dying since October. I wake up at night so afraid, so terrified that I couldn't be that afraid while awake. It has taken its toll. I've come to hate this life and this system of things. I've come to have no hope. I killed the children to exchange them for 5 minutes of pain for a lifetime of pain. I forced myself to do it, to keep them from suffering so much later. No mother, no father, no relatives. The fears of the fathers are transferred to the son. It was from my father to me, and from me to my son. He already had it, and now to be left alone, I had to take him with me. I killed Leanne because she was one of the main reasons for my demise. As I plan to kill others, I really wish I had not killed her now. She really couldn't help it, and I love her so much anyway. I know that Jehovah will take care of them in the next life. I'm sure the details don't matter. There is no excuse, no good reason. I'm sure no one will understand. If they could, I wouldn't want them to. I just write these things to say why. Please know that I love Leanne and the children with all my heart. If Jehovah willing, I'd like to see them all again in the resurrection, to have a second chance. I don't plan to live very much longer, just long enough to kill as many people that greedily sought my destruction. You should kill me if you can.
On Matthew's body, police found a note that read, "I give you my son, my buddy, my life. Please take care of him." On Michelle's body, police found a note that read, "I give you my daughter, my sweetheart, my life. Please take care of her."
Next, police found a note on Leanne's body that read, "I give you my wife, Leanne Barton, my honey, my precious love. Please take care of her. I will love her forever."
You can find more information about Mark Barton in Brent Doonan's book, Murder at the Office. And I just want to talk about this book for a second. So probably 100 of the 300 pages are worth reading. The other 200 pages are about Brent's life. And fun fact, he was born in Great Bend, Kansas. But most of the book was about Brent and his childhood, and then there's a section of pictures, and a lot of it is pictures of him in the hospital. But the interesting parts are him explaining what was going through his mind after he was shot. It was kind of sad to hear a first-hand account of what it's like to be shot 4 times and struggle to find an exit.
It seems like it would be I love reading those first-person accounts, but pretty often it seems like they need to tell them to someone, because I want to know about Brent, but I want to know about everybody else, and I want to especially know about Mark and Leanne and, their whole past, so.
Right. I was kind of interested. I wanted to know where he got his sources, because I can understand he can tell you about the employees, he can tell you about what happened that day. But I want to know, did he talk to police and collaborate with them to get the information on Mark and things like that? So I have a question for you, ladies.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Do you think Mark killed his first wife and her mother?
Yes.
Yes.
Same. I know in his suicide note, he wrote, "I did not kill my first wife and her mother. Even though they look extremely similar, I have nothing to hide now." But as we know, there are certain crimes that criminals will not admit to, even on their deathbed. It's just something they don't want to do.
The wording that he used actually in that situation was very interesting. He said, and I quote, "There may be similarities between these deaths and the death of my first wife, Deborah Spivey. However, I deny killing her and her mother. There is no reason for me to lie now." What was interesting to me is he didn't say, "I didn't kill them." He said, "I deny killing them."
Do you think that by saying, "I deny," do you think he's just denying it to himself? That's his inner thoughts. He's just so in denial that he killed her and her mother.
Yeah, I can't say for sure, but it is such an interesting way to phrase that, that it, again, leads me to believe that he is not being authentic.
It seems like he's vested in creating kind of a certain image of himself, and you go all the way back and you look at him pulling out the guns. I mean, I guess it could have been part of his psychotic episode. Maybe he doesn't think he did it. But between pulling out the guns, all of the lines, what he chose to do, it seems to feed into this weird image that he has of himself and what he's trying to create. I mean, I'd like it to be for the kids' sake, but of course, they're gone, and it's not for his family's sake. So it seems to me it has to do with his own ego.
So speaking of his image, this is another interesting part that I found. They, of course, interviewed a lot of people who knew him after these crimes took place, and they gave remarkably different accounts of him. His babysitter, who babysat his kids, was quoted as saying, "He was a really friendly guy, always saying something funny. He was always joking all the time." While his lawyer, who represented him after the killings of his first wife and mother-in-law, his lawyer said he was very, very quiet, very gentle, a man who cared about his children, cared, quite frankly, about his wife's murder and his mother-in-law. You see different accounts throughout the interviews they did after the crimes of people who knew him. And that is common for someone who is not authentic, who is trying to deceive people, who is wanting to create a persona, which falls in line with the persona of the badass killer with 2 guns shouting catchphrases right before he does his murders. And it also goes back to, in order to be authentic, you have to be vulnerable. Expressing authentic emotions is a state of vulnerability because you don't know how people will react to you. I also found it interesting that he deliberately appeared to kill some of the people who helped him, who tried to loan him money when he had lost all his money at the trading firms. And that, again, might point to the idea that it was intolerable for him to think that anyone saw him as vulnerable. So even though these people helped him, they had seen him at his worst. They were intimately aware that he was a failure. And it's possible that he couldn't tolerate them existing in the world knowing that he was a failure. He wanted to be a badass. It also sort of reminded me of the neighborhood kid who is playing a game with all the friends and strikes out, and everyone sees him strike out, and they're so humiliated and so embarrassed, they throw the ball over the fence so nobody else can play. You know, they end the whole game. They're mad at the game. They're mad at the players. You know, they, again, cannot tolerate being in a vulnerable position in front of others.
Wow, that makes perfect sense. Do you think that's why he also killed his wife and 2 kids? Because they also saw him being vulnerable?
Absolutely. And especially after this situation, he would not have been able to control what people told his children about him. He would have wanted them to believe that he was a hero and a badass with 2 guns and catchphrases. If his children lived on, they likely would have moved in with their maternal grandfather. And obviously, they had a falling out. He had a falling out with his former father-in-law after the murders of his first wife and his mother-in-law. So he would not have been able to control the narrative that went into his children's minds about himself. And he probably couldn't tolerate the thought of them not seeing him as a hero.
You know, I always wonder, why did you kill the kids? You know, just leave them out of it. But you explain that in a way that makes sense from his point of view, and not from mine, but it makes sense as to why he would think that.
Brooke's dropping knowledge bombs, you know? That sounded totally on point to me.
I need her on every episode. I need Laura on every episode to pronounce names. Jesus.
I did practice.
We can be your consultants.
Yep. Oh, thank you. Well, do you have any final thoughts on Mark Barton?
I would love to see him covered a little more. I think that it would be fascinating to really get an in-depth look into this, like a documentary. I don't think there is one. There's a couple of episodes of shows that have, you know, things like Snapped and things like that have covered him. I'm not saying it was Snapped, but of that ilk, right? But I would love to see an in-depth look because, like you said, I mean, Brent's book is interesting, but it's going to be limited by his knowledge of the situation. So I'd love to see someone from the outside come in and really dive in because this is an interesting case.
It is, and the information online is extremely limited. But the book provided way more than what's online. But like you said, Brent's knowledge is limited.
So I did want to add just one more part. I don't want to hammer it home, but it really makes sense to me that in his mind, the victims, the shooting victims, they were successful where he had failed. They were obviously still in good standing with the company. They were able to continue their day trading. Allowing them to keep succeeding at the same game that he had failed at may have seemed like a huge injustice to him. So again, it's like the kid who shuts the game down for everybody else because they're furious that they're losing. It also, I do think it should be noted that apparently his father was very cruel. We don't know to what extent that was, but, you know, a child who's in some ways you can call it emotionally tortured by a parent who's very cruel, can develop these responses that become totally maladaptive, and they end up doing things like this.
I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking about being vulnerable and things like that. It seems like as a child, his father, like you said, was very cruel. And I just wonder if he developed this sense of never wanting to disappoint somebody, because his father was probably very harsh on him if he disappointed his parents. And so I was wondering if that's where his need to never be vulnerable came from.
Yeah, because when a child is in a state of vulnerability, they need their parent to be caring. And if his father's response was to be cruel, it would make total sense that he would develop this extreme fear of allowing himself to be vulnerable around others, because he knew that he would, potentially get very hurt.
Well, your insight has been great for this episode. I think this is the first time I've covered a murderer who killed themselves before police could talk to them. And so it is really interesting to get your insight on him, because he didn't get the opportunity to talk to people.
As soon as he got captured, he would not have been the badass anymore. He wouldn't have been in control, and he probably just couldn't tolerate that.
Right. That's very true. Well, thank you for coming along for the ride, Laura and Brooke. I really appreciated it. It was fun.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was a blast to talk about. We love covering the cases that we cover, but it's really interesting as true crime fans who are interested in it to talk about different cases too. So it was awesome.
Yeah. Do you have a release date for season 1.5 yet?
Yeah, November. It's like November 13th or 14th, whatever the Monday is. Like, I'm not real good with numbers, but it's whatever that Monday is in November, the 13th or 14th. And it'll be a weekly release on Mondays, which is our usual release date. We're going to have 4 episodes on the case with a possible 5th that'll be the Q&A. Brooke says it's the 13th. Good. Mm-hmm. So we'll have those 4 episodes and possibly a 5th. And we're also in the pre-planning stages for our full season, which will be next spring. We're breaking it up because we usually do 7 to 8 episodes in a season. So we don't want to call our little season a full season per se. But yeah, we'll be doing that on Monica and Michael Bennett in Brunswick, Georgia. We're really excited about this one. We have had some really great contact with their family. And Brooke is going down there soon to do some in-person interviews. So we're really looking forward to getting that one out to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Great, I can't wait. I'll be playing a promo at the end of this so everyone can hear season 1 details and your 1.5 season details.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Until next time, please remember to check your back seats, and I'll see you at the next rest stop.
Today we hear of domestic violence, crime, school shootings, protests turning violent, and terrorist events spilling into our work environments. Workplace violence is not limited to your current or former employees. It may be perpetuated by customers, family members, or even strangers fixated on making a statement. Ensure you are aware of the safety procedures and safety measures in your workplace before you may be placed in a potential risky situation. You should immediately report any suspicious behavior or activity to your Human Resources Department. Never confront the individual. Stay safe.
Thank you to content editor Laura Taylor for making my research sound coherent. On Thursday, September 21st, I will be featured on the Is This Adulting podcast. You can hear me talk about various topics, including bad movies, anxiety, and more. We even play a fun game. Please check the show out and let us know what you think. I am happy to announce a contest for everyone who leaves a review. If you leave a review in the month of September, you will be entered to win the Murder Road Trip Survival Pack. You can find more details on our website or any social media site. HH Gnomes and I would like to do something to help the residents and animals of the recent hurricanes. For the rest of September, you can send me $1 or more, and I will send you a sticker in return. I will then donate 100% of the proceeds to the Red Cross and the SPCA. You can send your donation through PayPal to murderroadtrippodcast@gmail.com. Please make sure to put your name and address in the comment section of PayPal. I will be making weekly donations so the money gets there before October 1st. You can find Murder Road Trip at murderroadtrip.com, on Instagram and Twitter at murdertrip, and on Facebook at MRT Podcast. If you're interested in continuing the discussion, you can join the Murder Road Trip podcast group on Facebook. Make sure to check out the Murder Road Trip playlist on Spotify. You can even add your own songs to the playlist. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. If you'd like to listen to the episodes before everyone else, listen to bonus content, and get exclusive merchandise, you can check out Murder Road Trip on Patreon. September's bonus episode will cover John Emil List. Please stay tuned after the music to hear from some other great podcasts.
The Fall Line Podcast is a true crime audio serial focusing on marginalized communities in Georgia. The first season investigates the March 18, 1990 disappearance of Augusta, Georgia twins Nanette and Jeanette Millbrook. The twins, who were 15 at the time, were treated without cause as runaways, and their case was closed less than a week after their 17th birthday. Now, our podcast works to amplify the voices of the twins' family and to uncover facts, explore and dispel rumors, and develop theories in their case. Season 1.5, out this fall, will cover the case of missing Brunswick, Georgia siblings Monica and Michael Bennett, who disappeared in 1989. Join us as we work in real time to investigate their case.
Hi, I'm Roseanne, and I'm the creator and host of California Dreaming, True Crime Tales from the Golden State. Like many of you, I have a long-standing fascination with mysteries, crime, and justice. I bring you a different story each week that involves an event with a California connection. I have a few episodes up that are available for download on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Stitcher. I tell my stories with a quiet intensity, something to listen to when you need to get your true crime fix on, but you also need to wind down. So, check it out when you have a moment. California Dreaming, True Crime Tales from the Golden State. Now available on the Orbital Jigsaw Network.